Welcome to Engage, leading conversations that matter. Join in the conversation. Send an email to engage@cfpublic.org. Send a recorded talkback message on the free Central Florida Public Media app. Leave a voicemail by calling 407-273-2300, extension 246. Engage is made possible with the support of listeners like you.
You're listening to Engage on Central Florida Public Media. It's Thursday, September 5th, 2024. I'm Sharon Stone. Coming up, as the federal government ends free COVID booster shots, we'll talk with an epidemiologist about the impacts on transmission. Also, Zach Moldoff is looking to keep kids off the streets one skateboard at a time. We'll learn how SkateBud is teaching kids to channel their energy productively. And NPR weekend staple, Wait, Wait, Don't Tell Me, rolls into Orlando tomorrow. We'll talk with the host of the stand-up tour, Alonzo Bowden. But first, another school shooting in America. There was a time in my career when a school shooting was overwhelming. It was shocking. I didn't even know where to begin to cover it as a journalist. That is exactly how I felt during the Virginia Tech shooting in 2007, when 32 people were killed. Today, I still get angry and sad, but I also know who to contact, where to go for the correct information, and what steps to expect as the investigation unfolds. It's routine now. Schools do lockdowns and active shooter drills. It's routine. Yesterday, a 14-year-old killed 4 people at a Georgia high school. Officers swarmed, students sheltered, and parents raced. Today, we're going to talk about how this dynamic creates challenges in addressing mental health for students and families who expect school shootings. Marnie Stallman is the president and CEO of the Mental Health Association of Central Florida. She joined Engage this morning. I began our conversation by asking Stallman about the impact of the routine nature of these shootings.
It's become a problem for our generation of children today. And I'm a mom. I have a 16-year-old daughter who is in high school here in Orange County. And it's become a new normal. It's become an established way that they have become desensitized to, which is part of the concern because it's traumatic. And trauma in itself causes residual issues with anxiety, with depression, with how we handle stress, where we deposit our emotional reactions. And that numbing down is detrimental because it prohibits us from really dealing with what is affecting us emotionally in our, what I like to call activities of daily living, how we sleep, how we eat, how we interact with other people that are in our orbit of people we're close to. And that all has become affected by this establishment of just acceptance that these are occurrences that we just have to accept. And I think that that's been part of the big issue that we're seeing.
Yeah, and I think that when you talk to young people now, it's frequently not if, but when it comes to these school shootings. Can you talk to us and help us understand the impact of just that mentality and how that affects their long-term mental health?
Well, let's think about how it would affect ourselves, right? So this sense of imminent danger goes back to a really fundamental principle called fight or flight. And I know lots of people are familiar with that. You know, it's our internal mechanism of how we learn to defend ourselves, but more importantly, also protect ourselves. And it's important that that reaction stay current and not be numbed. But this constant, imminent, something's going to happen has caused that fight or flight reaction to really be negatively affected. And it's put us constantly in a state of one or the other. And that's not a normal resting place for our mental well-being and our physical well-being. And we see that manifested not just in how people are emotionally responding positively and negatively, both at the same time, but how it's affecting how we live physically, headaches, inability to sleep. As I said, that interruption of our activities of daily living that we can't get back to. And that again has caused kids, again, as a mom, to have a lot of concern about how they manage already that developmental period that they're in that's naturally stressful as they grow and age and go through the different social developments that they experience from elementary to high school ages. And so it's quite difficult, and it's interrupted, I think, and created difficulties with how to create good coping mechanisms and how to manage that fear and anxiety that seems to be at a constant level during our day.
I want to ask you about those coping mechanisms. What in the world are you supposed to do if a child comes to you and says they're scared to go to school?
A lot of times parents are really concerned, and it's a great question because we don't know what if we say the wrong thing, what is the right thing. And I really like to stress here there's not a wrong thing. And the first place to start is some conversation with yourself, preparing about how you're going to control your own level of anxiety. What are you doing as the parent, as the adult, to deal with your own issues? It's not just the kids that have been affected by this spat of gun violence and this constant barrage of 24-hour news cycles where we're constantly hearing and being exposed to a heightened sense of danger across multiple types of incidents, not just with the school shooting. So again, how are you managing your anxiety? Who are you able to go to? What resources do you have that you've put in place? How do you manage your anxiety and stress? Because I can assure you that even toddlers as young as 2 or 3 years old are watching the adults around them and can model and pick up on the cues when things are not really calm. And so we need to look at that. You know, research shows that when a parent is calm and under control, that's when they're in the best position to talk with their kids about scary things and to feel comfortable about it. Specifically, when we're talking about how do you have conversations about gun violence, hate crimes, you want to have individuals close to you that could be other community leaders, resources like what we have here at the Mental Health Association, family and friends. Then when we talk about how to talk to our kids, you know, there's some very specific ideas and developmentally appropriate ways depending on their age. You know, as I said, toddlers and preschoolers kind of take their verbal and emotional cues from the conversations and the behaviors that they see with adults around them. And they pick up on those reactions. You might see them regress a little bit emotionally. They might become a little bit more clingy or whiny or have difficulty sleeping. They may even start wetting their bed. These are all indicators that something's going on emotionally with them and that they need to have some attention paid to them. Might even be seeking some professional advice and making sure that you're doing that.
I think part of our audience growing up, they did different types of drills. You did fire drills. Kids now, you do active shooter drills. Do these safety measures propagate the stress when we're talking about these drills, classrooms being locked down?
I do think that it does help propagate the stress, but if you recall, even during the 1960s and the Cuban Missile Crisis, there were drills about children hiding under their desk. I think that over generations, there's been different times in history where we've been faced with different types of events that can cause anxiety or stress, and how we manage that, again, has been different generationally. But I do think that it's important to talk about the fact that while those safety measures can be stress provoking, if you're aware that a drill is occurring, I know in my daughter's case, in our school's case, we always get notification that a drill occurred, so that when we get home or they get home, you can process with them. Hey, I heard there was a drill today. What was that like? Did it bring up any feelings for you? Did you feel like you had a good grasp of what was being directed, that you felt like it was being helpful? Did it wasn't helpful? Those are all positive things that can be referred back to the school also in terms of how they're conducting conducting the drill, but it's also just another opportunity to check in. I think as we saw with the events of just yesterday, what's being reported, they had some safety measures that were in place that had only been there for just a week. And it did seem to dissipate and reduce the full impact of what could have been just a much more horrific experience.
How do you know if you're dealing with a situation that is escalating? How do you know when stress is just normal stress that kids go through, or like this is going to a place where I need to take this a bit more seriously?
So a good way to look at that is absolutely we have normal daily stress. We have eustress and distress. There's the good kind that motivates us. We're getting ready for a big game, or maybe there's even a test. I don't know if people call that good. But then there's obviously distress, and it's on a continuum. If the distress is impacting our activities of daily living and it's prolonged over more than a 3 to 5 day period, that's a concern. And the reason for that is, as I said, it can manifest into some physical symptoms that can be very concerning. If your child is reporting that they're now suffering from headaches where previously they don't get that, that's a manifestation of stress and our blood pressure rising as we try to control that, but our normal mechanisms of how we manage it or suppress it, it's not successfully working. Nightmares, interruption of sleep, if they're coming back and telling you that it's taking them a long time to fall asleep at night, or that their sleep is being interrupted when they normally have a pretty good sleep night, meaning they go all the way through, that's also something to be concerned on. Change in eating habits, change in their emotionality, if they're a little bit shorter on their fuse, or if they're opposite from that, being more isolated and withdrawn. Again, on a day-to-day basis, that could be considered just a normal teenager. But if it's happening over a prolonged period of time of more than 3 or 5 days, that's when it's really important to seek professional assistance and talk to somebody either at the school or somebody professionally. Again, resources that we have here at the Mental Health Association to get you connected to somebody that can walk you through how to start paying attention, because those can become exasperated, and then obviously we see them really affect our kids in a negative way, where they could react violently, or they could participate in some self-harming behaviors, or that depression and anxiety kind of sets in for a prolonged period of time and can interrupt their performance at school or any other activities that they're involved in.
Marnie Stallman is the president and CEO of the Mental Health Association of Central Florida. There's more ahead on Engage on Central Florida Public Media. Should you get the newly released COVID vaccine? If so, when? And what should people do now that the government isn't covering the cost of the shot? We're asking these questions and more to a local epidemiologist coming up next. If you miss any part of our show today, you can always subscribe to the Engage podcast and listen whenever it's convenient for you. The program will be available on demand at cfpublic.org. You're listening to Engage. You're listening to Engage on Central Florida Public Media. I'm Sharon Stone. Ahead on this program, Wait, Wait, Don't Tell Me has been an institutional part of NPR Weekend since 1996. This weekend, the Wait, Wait Comedy Roadshow rolls into Orlando with host Alonzo Bowden.
The cities, Orlando, Tampa, Miami, etc., are completely different from the space in between the cities. And you guys don't brag much about the space in between the cities. Let's be honest, that's not in the brochure.
Bowden joins Engage to talk about Gators, Florida Man, and the challenges of joking about the news. First, though, the FDA approved updated 2024-2025 COVID vaccines. The CDC is recommending the shot for everyone ages 6 months and older to protect from the latest strains, severe disease, and death. The agency says people who recently had COVID can wait 3 months to get the vaccine. Well, the U.S. government no longer covers the cost. Most private health insurance plans, Medicare and Medicaid, should pay for it. The CDC Bridge Access Program that gave free vaccines to uninsured or underinsured adults is over. It was supposed to last until December, but Congress ended it early. More than 11% of Floridians were not insured in 2022, based on U.S. Census Bureau numbers. They could be expected to spend up to $200 on a shot. Dr. Cindy Prince joined Engage this morning. She's Associate Professor of Medicine in Population Health Sciences at UCF and an infectious disease epidemiologist. We talked about when people should get vaccinated. We start the conversation by asking about the benefits of COVID boosters more than 2 years after the pandemic ended.
We know that prevention is not 100%, but it can prevent COVID, especially earlier after vaccination. And then the other thing it does for an individual is that it absolutely will lower your risk of being hospitalized or dying from COVID. And so that's still very important as an individual to get vaccinated. And then, of course, being able to prevent infection potentially, that is a boon for other people as well. But, even if we don't have everyone getting vaccinated, we know that idea of herd immunity kind of went out the door when we figured out that these COVID vaccines were not going to absolutely prevent infection. But that doesn't mean that there's no benefit to getting them. There's absolutely a benefit to the individual.
So we know Congress passed on funding the Biden administration's Vaccines for Adults program. Can you speak to the state of vaccines for children? Does it include COVID vaccines?
So children who are not covered by any insurance are still able to get vaccines through the Vaccines for Children program. And so I would certainly encourage parents to look into that. It's children who are uninsured or underinsured who should be able to still access those vaccines. And that was not part of that bridge access funding that we've lost. So they're still able to get this.
We know that school is back in session. What does that do to the calculus? Does that have any additional concern for you?
Well, with school being back in session, we know kids are going to interact more frequently with each other, and that increases the potential for COVID to spread among children. Children, they get lots of opportunities to get infected. I mean, that's just the nature of children, right? They're social, they're near each other. A lot of our schools have been able to improve some of their conditions as far as, their air quality and things like that. But, kids are still going to get infected. So certainly concern for kids who maybe have underlying conditions where getting infected is going to be a more serious outcome from them. They definitely want to make sure that they're getting vaccinated to try to prevent that, and really encourage parents to look at getting vaccinated for any child. And they should have a conversation with their child's pediatrician to, weigh any concerns they might have against the benefit of getting vaccinated.
Dr. Prince, I want to know from you, it's so overwhelming, the amount of information. Like, how do I know if it's the right time to get boosted? I had my first 3 shots. When do I know now is the time to get boosted? Who needs to get the boosted? Help me just make sense of all the information out there.
Yeah, absolutely. It is really, really confusing. Even I think for epidemiologists, we have to think a little bit about what's my own risk factor? What am I planning to do? When do I want to get boosted? So one thing to think about is now we have these new boosters. So these boosters are based on more recent variants of the virus. And so they should provide a little bit better protection than the boosters that were available over the summer. We're coming off of a wave now. We had that summer wave. I'm sure a lot of your listeners got COVID, unfortunately, during that time or know someone who did. So we're coming off of that wave. We typically expect there to be another wave starting around the middle of November. It's not a guarantee, but that's what we've seen in the past. So I would tell listeners, think about what are your plans? What are your risks? Do you have a big trip planned? Well, think about maybe getting vaccinated or boosted about a month out before that. What are your holiday plans? We definitely see cases start to increase over the winter holidays. And so that's how I make my own judgment of when to get boosted. I'll be at a conference at the end of October. I'm going to get boosted before that conference because that's a risk factor for me. So that's how I try to think about it. It does make it more difficult than just saying, hey, right now it's, this time of year and you need to go get boosted. But I would definitely encourage people to think about, a coming winter wave and when it is that they want to make sure that they have the highest protection and give themselves at least 2 weeks, maybe more than that, maybe about 4 weeks before that, to go and get their booster.
You mentioned there could be a spike coming up in November. Is that our new norm?
Well, it seems to be our new norm now that we have a spike in November. I think that winter spike has been pretty consistent throughout our pandemic. Part of that, I think, has to do with, people starting to be indoors more often, and then also to gather together, obviously, as we, see Thanksgiving. So some people getting infected and then bringing it to others as they go through the holidays. So it's not a guarantee. Again, we don't know for sure that that's when it's going to happen, but I think certainly we're settling into a pattern where we can expect there to be a winter wave the way we see with influenza. And then we've also had a bit of a summer wave over the past few years. And I think the summer wave is the question, is that going to continue? And we don't know, but I think the winter wave is going to stay with us.
Could you also talk about the vulnerable communities that this could disproportionately impact?
Yeah, so, in particular, obviously, as we're talking about these COVID boosters and the fact that we no longer have the Bridge Access Program in order to help people who are uninsured pay for those, we're talking about people who are maybe on the cusp or at higher risk, not yet eligible for Medicare. So if they're not insured, this is going to be a problem for them. Talking about people in their 50s, 60s who maybe don't have insurance and yet may have a higher risk of getting hospitalized or dying from COVID. And the other people I want to mention are those seasonal workers that we have. We have folks who come in and they do a lot for us as Floridians as far as harvesting and things. And these are also folks who potentially may not be covered with COVID vaccines. And so that's a problem as well. And then, we just want to think about anyone who is immunocompromised or anyone who has higher risk factors for bad outcomes with COVID-19, that they may get very ill. And those folks who are also not able to pay for this booster, that's another critical population, no matter what age.
And can you also, nobody wants a repeat of 2020. So in talking about mitigating a repeat of 2020, I'm thinking from a public policy perspective, what kind of safety nets are there for Central Floridians, either community, county, state, or federal level?
Yeah, so right now it's a little bit challenging because there's no one place necessarily to figure out where you can get a low cost or even potentially free COVID booster. Certainly check with your local Department of Health and find out if they have information for you or whether they have availability. You can check with federally qualified health centers to find out whether they have some availability if you have lower income. And then another possibility is looking toward just groups within your community. There may be groups that are distributing the vaccine for low cost or no cost as well. But there's no one-stop shop necessarily to be able to go on the internet and put in your zip code anymore like we used to and say, okay, well, here's where I can find my vaccine at no cost or low cost. So it's going to take a little bit of looking around. And the other thing I would encourage for folks who are unfortunately not able to find a low cost or no cost vaccine, do call around if you're going to get vaccinated and pay out of pocket, because you want to know upfront what the costs will be. The vaccines have their own costs, but then there's also often an administration fee for administering the vaccines. So call in advance and find out and see whether you can find the lowest possible cost that you can find, but it's still going to be probably in the neighborhood of $200.
Cindy Prince is Associate Professor of Medicine in Population Health Sciences at UCF. In 2019, Zach Moldoff and his wife were living in Los Angeles. He was trying to get a business off the ground that promoted skateboarding events and concerts. The business was a struggle, but he found great satisfaction from the interactions with the kids in his community and their response to the skate culture he was bringing to their neighborhoods. Following the COVID pandemic, the Moldoffs tired of the LA lifestyle and headed to the Sunshine State, setting up shop in Orlando near Zach's family. That is where Skate Bud began to take shape. Zach sees an opportunity to provide kids in Central and South Florida with a healthy distraction from the risks of the streets. Give a kid a skateboard, and they will skate. That's the basic tenet of Skate Bud. Empower youth by giving them something they can focus on and control. A kid wasting time learning to kickflip isn't wasting his time slinging drugs. So Zach partnered with numerous businesses, and now he travels into communities in and around Orlando and Miami, where he provides the parts and knowledge for kids to build their own skateboards. That's exactly what Zach was doing last Friday at the Pine Hills Boys and Girls Club. Dozens of kids lined up to screw wheels onto the axles and axles onto the decks. Then they personalize each board with stickers and paint markers. Engaged producer Richard Copeland stopped by the Pine Hills Boys and Girls Club to learn more about Skatebug. Zach Moldoff began the conversation by explaining how his own experience as a troubled youth led to the creation of his nonprofit.
I got arrested when I was a kid, and I got in trouble enough and saw enough things at a young age that made me understand life, I think, in a different way than most of the people who were my peers growing up. And that forced me to look for different experiences, and I found skateboarding, and really through that was able to, I would say, feel like a person for the first time. And I, instead of just being surrounded by the people who were immediately around me by circumstance, you know, from where you go to school and what neighborhood you live in, it was these other skateboarders from around the county, and we all met at a skate park that had opened, an indoor skate park in South Florida called South Florida Extreme. It was in Pembroke Pines. You know, and started meeting up with all these people from around the county, and it was like, oh, cool, let's go skate. You know, and these became the first relationships that I had where I would say I really started to understand being an adult and society and so many things, and then becoming a parent, recognizing the value that that can deliver to a young developing person was, to me, I just saw urgency in doing that. It would be easy to just like have this generalized explanation and say, oh, because I'm Jewish and tikkun olam is important, you know, to repair the world, then I just do this. But it's more significant than that. But I do think in a large part that is what figures into it also. I just feel a great urgency to address things that I see are like not right.
Why skating? What do you get from skating, and what is it about that you want to share with others?
I think it gives a sense of self-actualization and like a process for self-actualization and just discipline and exercise and producing results, and you know, but it's all discipline that you put on yourself, that you choose. So it's wherever you need it to meet you at, it'll meet you there, right? So it can adapt to so many different people's circumstances and needs. And I recognize the transformative power that it has had for me. And I know so many other people who can say the same thing, that I know from experience that it works, right? And it works really good, especially for people who maybe other stuff doesn't, the normal solutions, right? Like playing on a baseball team and the things that we might say are, you're going to find them in school, right? And you're going to be just exposed to them. They're everywhere. They're institutionalized.
This is something that you create yourself.
Right. As you do it, and you determine who you're going to do it with, how long you're going to do it for. If you are trying to learn a certain trick or go to a certain place or accomplish a certain thing, and then when you actually do it, was it done well enough? Like, do you want to do it better? Do you want to go back again and just try it again? Like, there's so many it really, it's so open-ended that I think it really causes us to think in a way that is juxtaposed to the standards that we're seeing in society now, right? Where the internet is kind of feeding you all these opportunities for things to do and people to be. And skateboarding says, like, yeah, all of that is true, but what are you bringing to it? Like, there's no prompt, right?
So it's facilitating a level of creativity that you don't typically find in organized sports.
Absolutely. And, you know, it's funny because there's always been a kind of juxtaposition of, is skateboarding an athletic art or is it a creative sport? You know, and it really is both. It's whatever someone would say they need it to be. And I think that's what's so interesting about it too, is that it pushes back on the idea that there's one category that it should fit into. And it's just, why are we bothering with the categories?
So we just had the opportunity to see skateboarding in Paris during the Olympics. So tell me what you were feeling, what kind of emotions did it elicit for you to be able to see that verified like that?
Yeah, I mean, it's been really great. And I feel extra lucky because, you know, I'm not there and I don't want to overstate the significance of any of this or make it sound like I'm someone that I'm not. But there are some people that I know that we're competing, you know, and it's exciting to know that. And I have a friend who's a sports agent that represents some of the top competitors who are there. And like, to not just to say like, oh yeah, like I know someone, but to really say like, these are the people who I'm working with, like my peers in this industry that are striving for something that I see being recognized as such a positive by the rest of the world. It's so great. I watched it with my son on TV and I shouted, you know, and not to shout just to be like, to shout at the TV, but out of genuine, I was overwhelmingly awed by some of the things that I saw. And to have that too, where, you know, I started skating in the 90s, all these people who push back against it and say like, it's not core, it's not street, it's not real. The people who I know who made street skateboarding what it is, who these detractors would worship, they wouldn't agree with that, right? They would say, hey, if that's what these people want to do, look how good they are, right?
So let's bring this back to the Central Florida communities. You said you got started in Los Angeles. What brought you to Orlando?
I went to college here. I lived here from 2000 to 2005. This was the first place I ever did any kind of real skate programming. I had done skate lessons when I was in high school for one of the local skate shops. And when I got here, I worked at a foster home. And some of the kids had skateboards. I was like, I'll take you guys out to skate on the weekends. Like, let's go. You know, so it would be the kids who would skate, but then also kids who didn't skate because it was just something to do to get out.
And are you seeing that provide a productive outlet for these kids?
I mean, not only is it productive, like I said, I think for people of all ages, skateboarding works especially well for people that aren't being met by traditional services, right? Or people whose needs are not being met by traditional services. Or if they are being met, could be met better, because skateboarding is this way for the individual to have control, right? And a lot of times when you find kids who've been exposed to extreme trauma, what do they need? Control. And a lot of times the terms for the services that are offered, they jive against that control in an unproductive way. And with skateboarding, we can make it safe without asking participants to relinquish any control. And that, I think, is what makes it just, yes, on the whole, like for anyone, it doesn't matter who you are, like of any circumstance, skateboarding would probably be great for you. But especially for those kids who are going through the developmental stage where, like me, they could make a mistake and get arrested at a young age, and that's hard to shift courses from. You know, when we understand it from the outside in terms of like a box you check and categories, I think it seems much more simple of like, oh yeah, how long could it take to get over that? But when you think like, I've never been able to get hired, ever, for a full-time job except at a restaurant. I've only been looked at as someone who's good enough to be a contractor, freelancer. Like, we can't trust this guy to let him in. And that's not because I have a master's degree. I've done all kinds of things. I have the experience, right? Like, my portfolio shows it. Like, people who are my references would speak to it. But something about me, I just don't understand how to communicate in the way that those people are looking for. It's not I'm not trying to say I'm being discriminated against, right? It's just that I just don't get it. Because at that point when all of you were on the same path, I was on a different path. And that's those young kids that need control, that are being told, well, if you want the control, here's what you have to sacrifice, right? And skateboarding doesn't make them sacrifice anything. And to get that guidance and to have someone help you do it safely, and then on top of that, hopefully like providing mentorship that cultivates not just your capacity to skateboard, but your capacity to take what you learn skateboarding and apply it to something else in life, that becomes extra powerful.
That's producer Richard Copeland speaking with Skatebud founder Zach Moldoff. Coming up, Wait, Wait, Don't Tell Me is NPR's longtime comedy quiz show. The uncensored spinoff is live in Orlando tomorrow. Listen to Central Florida Public Media's Engage live on the radio at 90.7 FM in Greater Orlando and the Space Coast, and 89.5 FM in Ocala and the Villages. Stream us live on your tablet or computer at cfpublic.org, on your phone with the free Central Florida Public Media app, or tell your smart speaker to play Central Florida Public Media. You're listening to Engage. You're listening to Engage on Central Florida Public Media. I'm Sharon Stone. You can hear Wait, Wait, Don't Tell Me on Central Florida Public Media on Saturday mornings at 10 and Sundays at noon. The quiz show that mixes news and comedy is an institution on NPR, amusing audiences since 1996. Some of the program's regular panelists are taking the show on the road for the Wait, Wait stand-up tour. That includes comedian Alonzo Bowden. He joined Engage to talk about hosting the event tomorrow night at the Plaza Live Orlando. Bowden began the conversation by describing the difference between recording the show for radio and performing live on stage.
Many, as you know, any Wait Wait listeners know, a lot of the panelists are comics. So on the tour, we're doing our stand-up without having, the parameters of answering questions, which we're not really answering anyway, or any FCC regulations or whatever. And people think, oh, they're going to be talking dirty. It's not that. It's that we can choose our own topics and do our actual act, which is a lot of fun.
So on the radio, you have this challenge. You have to be witty, irreverent. You have to resonate with the people at the same time. How do you do that and keep it clean?
On the radio, it's not super difficult because we're aware of the parameters of radio. So your brain is like, okay, I can go this far, but I can't cross that line. Of course, we do record on Thursday and edit on Friday, and you hear the show on Saturday. So we do cross the line. That's why we say if you hear us unedited, you might be a bit surprised. Let me tell you something. Faith Saley is filthy. All right? Yeah, I said it.
That's why we have you here. I want the inside information. Monday through Friday, or when you go into tape, we find the news, vexing. How do you find it funny? How do you make it an amusing story?
Well, it's an unending process. I say that comedy's never been this difficult because there was a time when you could do satire and you could make fun of the news. Now, anything you make up, the real news will beat it. If I told you that the Republican Party is really upset that the Democratic candidate smiles, you'd be like, no, that's not. Oh, yeah, major issue. Look at her smiling in public. It's terrible. So the toughest part of doing comedy is beating the actual news.
Alonzo, is there anything that is off limits? Just, this is not funny, not going to go there.
No, as long as it is funny. The crowd can always tell if you're joking or if you're being mean or racist or sexist or, misogynistic or whatever. The crowd can feel it. I always equate it to dogs have a sense of people. And, you can always tell. What's the saying that I don't trust people who don't like dogs, but I'll always trust a dog that doesn't like a person. Mm-hmm. It's kind of the same way with the crowd. They know where you're coming from. So there isn't really anything off limits as long as you make it funny.
Do you feel like you can get away with something in one show that there's no way you could with a different audience?
That's when I'm doing crowd work. That's when I'm improvising with the crowd, which I love doing because you come up with these situations that may only be funny once in that moment because a certain person says something or now I'll give you an example. I was doing a show Saturday night and there were two women sitting there and there were two empty seats next to them. And I said, "What's with the empty seats?" And she said, "Oh, he's at home with his wife." Now, in the moment, it was hilarious. And I riffed on that and we joked about it. But if you hear that today, somebody saying, "Well, that's horrible. He's cheating on his wife with this woman." So you see, it you have to be in the moment.
No, that makes total sense. I want to talk about Florida and performing in
Ooh,
Florida
yeah.
specifically. Yeah,
Which is an unending source of material. I don't know if you guys are aware of it, but we've been talking about you, Florida.
I think that we are aware, we are in the know of that. Let me ask you about how does that influence you as a performer? What do the culture wars look like from your side of the stage as a comedian?
I, you know, I don't know that there's a culture war in comedy. I mean, listen, Florida's funny, okay? I mean, you guys from denying science exists to throwing alligators at people to, by the way, you guys have a strange relationship with alligators. We can't really talk about it on the radio, but there's been things, uh, you know, and everyone knows it. So it's not a culture war to make fun of the ridiculousness of Florida. As someone who's lived most of his life in California, we kind of like the fact that we're not the crazy state, but you guys took over big time. Even Mississippi's like, whew, thank God for Florida. So the people who are most angry about it, and let's be honest, the extreme right wing, they don't go to comedy shows. They don't laugh. They're angry at people who laugh. So I don't worry too much about upsetting them.
Do you feel like it's almost too easy to perform in Florida? Is the fruit just too low hanging?
Well, no, but you don't want to do the whole show about it. That's when it becomes low hanging. It's like Trump jokes. You know, I got tired of Trump jokes personally in 2017. It got to the point where on the show, on Wait Wait, they said you can only do one Trump joke per show because it's constant. The ridiculousness of it, the ridiculous thing he says, the hateful things he says, et cetera, et cetera. And then it becomes one note, and that's boring in comedy. You don't want to do 20 minutes on one thing. So yeah, that's how we keep moving. So if I joke about Florida, usually I'm going to joke about Florida. It'll be something that's happened recently in Florida, not the overall vibe of Florida. Although I do have some jokes about the vibe because I've been there enough to know some Florida things where people who don't go to Florida may not know. And that's always fun. And people actually like when you do a joke that's local to them. I think they enjoy that. So yeah, I'll have Florida jokes when I get to Orlando, I promise.
How would you describe the vibe?
Well, here's the thing about Florida that a lot of people outside of Florida don't know. The cities, Orlando, Tampa, Miami, etc., are completely different from the space in between the cities. And you guys don't brag much about the space in between the cities. Let's be honest, that's not in the brochure.
No, I think that's fair. Every city is very different in Florida. We're talking with comedian Alonzo Bowden. He is hosting the Wait Wait stand-up tour. Can you give me some insight into what it's like to be a panelist on Wait Wait? Can you tell when it's going to be a good show when you have the right mix of panelists?
Well, I'm not sure how the producers pick the mix of panelists, but it works when we know each other. It works. Also, there's a generosity in tagging another person's jokes. So if Dulce says something funny and then I can take that and run with it, that makes it a much better show. Sometimes the questions and topics help, And there are certain panelists who are just, characters, natural characters. Of course, Paula being one. And so there's a lot that goes into it being a great show. And sometimes it's what happened in the news that week. I mean, last weekend, the Democratic convention was, you could have done a 3-hour show on that. That was such a party. It was so insanely upbeat and uplifting. And as I say, anytime you can get Lil Jon and Stevie Wonder at the same party, you got you a hell of a party.
Correct. Confirmed. How would you describe Wait, Wait? Is it a quiz show? Is it a news show? Is it current events? Like, what is it to you?
It is a hilarious, irreverent news quiz where it's more important. This is how I describe Wait, Wait. It's more important to be funny than to be right. Because if you win the show, do you know what you get, Sharon? Do you know what you get for winning? Absolutely nothing. So you might as well be funny.
When I listen to Wait, Wait, I laugh out loud. I'm wondering if I'm the same audience that you will be performing to in the stand-up tour. Am I going to laugh out loud on the tour as well if I'm a fan of Wait, Wait, Don't Tell Me?
You are going to laugh more at the stand-up show than you do at the radio show, because it is pure stand-up, unfiltered, unedited, and hilarious comics on the show. Josh is a brilliant writer. I love Josh. Dulce is funny in so many ways, and Negin is hilarious. Negin, very, very highbrow. You want to study a little. No, I'm joking about that. I joke with her about that. But you're going to laugh start to finish, because we're not limited in any way. So I personally guarantee laughter out loud amongst people.
Can we hold you to it?
Oh, yeah, no problem, Sharon. If in the event you don't laugh, I will give you my prize the next time I win Wait, Wait, Don't Tell Me.
Is that a whole lot of nothing?
Absolutely.
Excellent. Win-win. Is there anything else our audience should understand before we let you go?
Bring your children at your own risk. They may learn a few new words. Again, not fully bad, but they might learn a few things. They might teach you a few things that you don't know. Show up, laugh. It's going to be an hour and a half break from reality. That's what a great stand-up show is. It's an hour and a half off, and then we'll let you go back to Florida, and you can all go back to doing Florida things. Speaking of Orlando, one of my favorite things is the fact you have the alligator experience. So when Dad gets tired of taking the kids to Disney and the Universal, and the kids are really getting on his nerves, he's like, okay, let's go pet alligators. You pet the alligators, I'll have a beer. You guys shouldn't have that in the same place, and yet you do.
Alonzo Bowden is hosting the Wait, Wait stand-up tour tomorrow night. That is Friday, September 6th at Plaza Live Orlando. Doors open at 7 for the 8 o'clock show. And you can listen to Wait, Wait, Don't Tell Me Saturday mornings at 10 and Sundays at noon on Central Florida Public Media. You can listen to Engage anytime on demand at cfpublic.org or live on Tuesdays and Thursdays at 3 o'clock. We want to hear from you. Let us know what you'd like to hear more about or what you're glad you heard. You can send us an email to engage@cfpublic.org, or you can send us a talkback on the free Central Florida Public Media app. I'm Sharon Stone. Thank you for joining us. All Things Considered is coming up following NPR News.